Welcome to this session of Painting Best Practices interviews with artists. And before we interview our artist and founder of the Epiphany Fine Art School, Matt Miller, just have some explanation. Some of you may not be familiar with Painting Best Practices. Painting Best Practices was a full-on workshop that has been conducted since 2013. We've taught thousands of students about the best practices in painting. So it's not a course about how to paint, but rather how to use the materials from the support, from the preparation, the priming, all the way to the finish, varnishing, how to use them properly, what kinds of materials, and the choices artists make and how they affect the longevity of their artwork. And that's really the key in painting best practices. We also want to announce that tomorrow on Sunday, July 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to be interviewing James Robinson, who is the founder of the Art Academy of St. Paul. And James has a unique, perhaps although older approach to teaching both children and adults art. And his 30 years experience of teaching children, teens, and adults, he's going to discuss how he applies in-depth understanding of the studio apprentice system of the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, and how this can streamline traditional teaching methods that produces extraordinary results. So now I'm going to introduce Matt Miller, who I said is founder of Epiphany Fine Art, and we're going to talk about how he works with the limited modern Zorn Palette to make both colorful and visually balanced paintings. And Matt attended the Painting Best Practices workshop as well as the 6-day workout, and learned many of the principles that we've been teaching in these workshops. And now it's a full-on webinar on the paintingbestpractices.com. So let's introduce now Matt, and he can tell you what he's learned about that.
Hi, George.
Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
And Matt, and I forgot exactly when you, I think it was some years, probably 4 years ago, I think.
17, yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
2017.
When you attended a workshop, and then of course I think it was 2019, you attended the workout here in Northern California. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what were the major things that you took away, both as an artist as well as, of course, a teacher of your own, from these workshops?
Well, I had spent many years learning to paint from my teachers and practicing my art. And several of the things that I had taken for granted that I was taught and used every day, I later realized are problematic were explained to me actually that are problematic in the longevity of the paintings. For example, I use Maraget exclusively as a medium, and have since switched to oleogel, as it has almost the same feel as Maraget. I actually like it better now. I went back and tried to use a little Maraget just to see what it felt like after several years of using oleogel, and I didn't like it anymore. Because oleogel is simply, it's 95% linseed oil, so it's not going to damage your painting. It doesn't have the
resins and things like that.
Dry, harden, and crack. I went to see a show at a museum not that long ago. There were a lot of paintings painted by an artist that were done. It was an exclusive show of this artist, and they were all painted about 100 years ago. Almost every single one of them, it was almost impossible to see the painting through the cracks. Several of the images of people were actually retouched by conservators to make it so that you could see the people. They had faded so badly. in a room, and the other a separate room down the hall, there was a different artist that they had presented that had painted their work in a circa 1610, and it was like it was painted yesterday. It was almost flawless, and clearly there was a difference in the way that the artist were handling the materials. What I've learned from when I worked there, I have since switched to a solvent-free studio. I'm almost 100% solvent-free. Um, it OMS doesn't touch my board. It doesn't touch my easel, and it doesn't touch my brushes. And as a matter of fact, I found that eliminating OMS or turpentine not only is easier on my breathing, but it also is it makes my brushes last a lot longer.
Hmm.
It used to dry out the brushes, and they would literally turn into spread out and splay. Um, what are some of the other things that I took away from that? I fix I fix an oiling out problem, which affects almost every artist that I know. In the beginning, by properly maintaining the materials, properly preparing the boards. I tend to paint on boards. I prefer the hard surface. I would recommend that if people paint on canvas, that they mount it on boards and paint on it that way. Something else that came out away from that. Basically, we learned how to make it so that the paintings, you mitigate all of the issues that are affecting paintings, over time. Not just the choice of materials and how you're mixing materials and how you're applying the materials. Whether you're painting in layers or you're painting direct style like I do, but also how to prepare the panels or the canvas, to best prevent the acid causing problems or moisture causing problems. It never occurred to me that putting hanging a painting on a wall that happens to be an outside wall would impact the painting, as opposed to hanging a painting on an inside wall. It's just from the moisture coming through the wall and through the back of the painting. So we learned how to prepare the frame and the canvas, to prevent that moisture, to put a moisture block there. And it was endless, the changes to my painting practices. And one thing I want to make clear, actually, is I've heard a lot of artists say that they don't want to bother with materials because they don't want to impact their creativity. And I can tell you something, it doesn't impact your creativity. It just makes it so that your creative process can last longer.
Hmm.
So that's my take on it. Uh,
And just for some individuals that may not know what Merage medium is, Merage is a mixture of a mastic varnish, turpentine, and black oil, which is actually oil that's been cooked with lead. And although the Merage, the medium was suggested by Jacques Merage, a conservator from the Louvre in the middle of the 20th century, it actually is basically based on a McGilp that originated out of the 18th century. And so some of the paintings we see from the like Joshua Reynolds paintings from the 18th century and paintings after that had this concoction, like J.M.W. Turner and some of these other artists, like perhaps one of the artists you mentioned may have had resins or other things in there that often result in very brittle paint films and then eventually cracking of that. So, and that's one of the things that of course we discussed in the workshop to either avoid or at least limit greatly in the paint film. And Matt, were you originally painting on stretched canvas? Did you?
I originally painted on stretch canvas, but I had moved to board quite a while earlier,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until I moved to board because I just preferred the surface. I like a very smooth, solid surface to paint
Mhm.
on. And I later, through my discussions with the painting best practices, learned how board, and different types of board, whether it's natural board, how the board is cut, the way it's cut across the grain, the type of wood, hardboard versus natural board. And like I say, these days I paint almost exclusively on aluminum composite material through artifacts because I love it's just very inert, and it also helps prevent the moisture from getting through to the painting. Another thing, by the way, I do want to mention is that very strongly it was emphasized the impact of zinc on oil paintings, and there is no zinc in any of the paints that I use, either as a mixture, I use lead white, and a lot of the lead whites I was using that you can buy off the market that are typically called flake white these days, are a mixture of zinc and lead.
Right.
And, it's one of the reasons I love lead white #1. I know what's in it, which is lead white, and I also know that the pigments that I buy through you guys don't have zinc in them, even in small quantities, as an additive that isn't mentioned anywhere on the label.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that just along that line there, we know that zinc was often used, maybe not even as, like you mentioned, as almost like an additive, because manufacturers understood that it did brighten their colors when you squeeze them out of the tube. If you have two pigments and you add a little zinc to it, it did brighten it. It looked much brighter. But for some of our viewers who may not be familiar with zinc, and what we've been what in painting best practices we've been talking quite a bit about is that zinc does cause embrittlement in zinc white or zinc oxide causes embrittlement in oil paint films, and this has really just come to light. I mean, this has actually been known for over 100 years, but has really been nailed down recently. And it's interesting that a lot of manufacturers are actually either limiting the zinc white or actually eliminating it from their color line. And so it appears to be like it is a real thing and a real concern.
So another issue, the thing that I pulled away from the painting best practices is I use linseed oil predominantly in the pigments, mixtures of pigments that I use. I had experimented with safflower oil, and I realized because a lot of people were talking about how delicate it is, and all kinds of stories, and I've heard out of that I've heard some of the issues of thick impasto paints, which I do have in some of my passages, literally weeping years after the painting's dry and sold. Mm-hmm. Something I definitely want to avoid.
Right. Yeah. So now Matt has prepared this video showing how he uses the Zorn Palette. So I'm going to let you introduce the video, and it is about 27 minutes long. And so why don't you go ahead and introduce it, and then we'll go ahead and watch it then.
Well, I had done this video recently. I did a full video. It's a 3-hour end-to-end video detailing the process, and I took some salient parts out of it for this presentation that I thought would be interesting to people. I do believe I have about a 30-second introduction in the beginning of the video. So
yeah, you do actually, yeah.
So I'll just let it go ahead. I don't need to introduce it twice.
Okay, we'll do that. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Matt Miller from Epiphany Fine Art. I have been invited here by Natural Pigments to make this little demonstration about painting with the limited palette, in this case specifically the Zorn Palette, or I should say a modern version of the Zorn Palette, which includes yellow ochre, Cad Red Light, which is a replacement for, I believe, vermilion, which is what he used originally, lead white, and ivory black. I'm using Natural Pigments paints, in which case their name for ivory black is bone black, and I'm specifically using the lead white #1. I'm going to be going over some advantages and disadvantages in using the limited palette such as this as we go through the presentation, including some ways to maximize its use and to get the most colorful feel out of the colors that you can achieve with it. It's remarkable how many colors you can achieve, but they're all relatively muted in most cases because of the fact that they're all mixed with very limited colors. Most of them being mixed with black. Black is the only blue that's available. There's a lot of blue and ivory black, and you can mix bluish colors and greens and other colors with it, as I will be demonstrating. Just a little comment about the still life before I get started. I'm leading in on the left with a muted blue vase and some red and dark red grapes, red-orange grapes. The red-orange grapes are filling in that little spot, the dark there, and helping to lead into the main actor, which is this reddish-greenish mottled vase. And we finally come to a climax point, if you wish, with the orange, the couple oranges and little white flowers. Orange is one of the brightest colors you can achieve with this palette. The only yellow you have is yellow ochre, which is an earth color, but in comparison to the other colors here, it can appear very bright by itself. And as a result, the oranges at the climax point are a little bit of a pop. So let's get started with blocking in. Now let's get a sense here what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up right about here and right to about here.
Matt, maybe we have a question there about how did you tone that panel while we're watching this too?
Bring this a little bit further down.
Actually, what I did was I believe in this case, it was just a mixture of some oleogel and probably, I'm not even sure what colors I specifically used in this. I think I wanted it a little bit warmer, so I used, it might have been a little yellow ochre and black, or I'm not even sure what I mixed at this point. And may have just been a little yellow ochre and raw umber, I'm not sure. And then with a little oleogel, quickly smeared it onto the canvas and wiped it off with a paper towel. Lightly, to just get a general tone in the background.
And so, because a lot of people, they when they see toned canvases, they think automatically solvent, and
Nope.
So it's always interesting that people can actually do that. And what was the approximate drying time?
Well, I often paint with it while it's still wet, but because I actually like the effect of being able to make marks into the board. But if I do want it dry, I just leave it overnight.
Great. I know I know you're commenting over this, but we can take we can actually just do some of these questions unless
this is in the right place. You put together a really lovely drawing and you get it very detailed. You're not going to want to mess with it or move it. You put a lot of effort into it. The same thing happens when you even just you start painting. A lot of people will start painting and get a lot of work done, get it all situated, and then look at it and say, yeah, that's the wrong place. I'm not going to move it. It's too much difficulty. And I'm looking at this now and trying to decide if I like this location.
There's a really good question out there right now, George, and that's about how to rinse out dirty brushes while painting without using OMS.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
I actually don't rinse out the brushes. I just wipe the brush off if I need to get it clean with a paper towel. I find that I actually will paint a single painting, almost an entire painting with one brush often, without rinsing it out at any point in the process. Just simply wipe off the brush when I go from paint color to paint color, and then you can get all kinds of really cool effects by how much pressure you put on the brush as you're applying the different colors in there. Yes, we jumped to getting the background in.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, I just use some. If I really have some colors that don't work well with each other, if I'm painting a blue water and yellow into something, and I don't want it to turn green, I'll grab a separate brush for that. Predominantly, I just tip off the excess paint with my paper towel.
I
And
can flip back and forth to the audio, but that that color mixture there is that's the cadmium red and
That's cadmium red and a little bit of black, just to shade it down a little bit, to bring its value in line with the rest of the colors that I'm mixing with the green. Because I'm mixing the yellow with the green to make the yellow, excuse me, with the black to make a green, and I'm also mixing the white with the black to make a blue. So to bring the cad red into the same value structure, I mixed it with the black to pull it down as well.
oh, it's great.
Mixing a touch of white and just the cad red in there with a touch of blue, black actually, to get a sort of a purplish tone in this at this point, which I'm saying all the same things on the demonstration, but yeah, would it be accurate to think that Matt has studied with David LaFell? Yes, absolutely. I take it Chris has seen David.
And there was an earlier question. Do you usually start with shadows and darker tones?
I start by framing in. Often when I when I get the basic gist of the location of things, I'll frame in the shadow marks to give myself a sense of where the shadow acts as a boundary to light, and then I'll start working in the light. So I often do work that way, but it's not a hard and fast rule.
So I'll go back to the
And here we're trying to lighten up the point where highlight will naturally work across or down the stem of the vase, and in a few seconds I'll be putting in a actual highlight in the first highlight in the object, right in the concave point of the stem. As we all know, highlights occur at any point where the object is either at its absolute concave or convex point. That's where light accumulates. You lose color, and we perceive what we see as a white light or a white dot. And if we put those in the right spots, actually I'm jumping into putting some background color in here, or some dark shading color in here, and I'm going to be using a very dark greenish color, just pulling in some of the background as the shadow color. And I'll be I sped this up as it's a little less important to just
Would you like me to
the
talk about
shadow
the
color
question
being put
about
in.
lead white
And again,
number
I'm
one or
trying to
lead white number
condense
two,
a
George?
Sure, if you'd like to talk about that, yeah.
half hour. Thank you.
I mean, lead white number 2, correct me if I'm wrong, George, is mixed with a bodied oil.
Let's also actually take a look
It's actually walnut oil.
into the shadow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to blend this
And it has a long, stringy feel to it. It's a very long paint.
Light flows over.
Lead white number 1 is a standard, what I would call a more modern shorter paint that to me it's the workhorse of the lead paints that I use.
Where and you use both? Is that correct?
I do. I use lead white number 2 more in when I want to be able to apply the paint in I don't know how to say it other than in a more stringy fashion. I want to be able to drag it out over the canvas rather than just apply it in small strokes.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's where that stringiness really works very well for that. And it's amazing that walnut oil, usually you were correct in saying, bodied oil kind of makes stringy paint, but in this case with lead with walnut oil tends to make it very stringy.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, it's because the lead reacts more with the linseed oil than it does with the walnut oil. So that in reacting, what I mean, it's forming soaps faster or more readily than, let's say, walnut oil.
Okay, that makes sense. So with the walnut oil, the lead actually retains more of its pliability in that sense.
Yes, yeah. So I'll go back to the audio
That
here.
will actually help convince my eye of what I'm doing and keep the overall concept, in my head. I mean, I need to see this thing looking, the beauty of it starting to happen the entire time I'm working on it, rather than working to some kind of middle space and putting in finishing touches only at the end. By continuously working towards the finish, I'm able to see the painting develop before my own eyes and to keep it fresh in my own mind, which helps guide my hand and guide the process. And we're going to put the stem in the top of the stem in the opening, and you'll see I'm doing the same thing. I will be pushing the dark, pulling the two together, and then putting a highlight in there. Because at the top of the stem of the bottle you're going to get another highlight.
George, do you want to address the question that was recently asked about whether the video will be available to watch again?
Yes, this video will be available to watch, and more importantly, the full, is it 3-hour video, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So that will be available from Epiphany Fine Art, and I put the in the comments of the YouTube video, I placed your link there.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving along, with a little bit of a warmer color going across there to bring out the light. Again, here we've just mixed a touch more of the yellow into the red to give it a little bit more of an orange tone, and there goes that highlight. And then we're going to go back to working on the main body of the vase. We've got the stem starting to look like something. Was able to carve some of that background out to carve some of the stem out by putting the background in there to clean up any edges that spill over. I find it's always a much stronger painting when you can carve out of the background rather than paint the foreground. You'll have cleaner strokes. I've been applying some of that green. This is a green that's a mixture of nothing but yellow ochre and black, which gives you that muted, sagey kind of green color. And at this point I'm just kind of pulling the two sides together to get a sense of the blend or fading of the vase from one to the other color as it is in the actual vase. Although I'm kind of, again, just using that as a reference point through which I'm going to build this vase. One of the advantages of the Zorn palette or any limited palette, is that it forces you to mix your colors and becomes, as a result, easier. It's kind of an aid to making your colors, to pulling your values together. Once you have a million colors on your palette, artists can easily get led astray about the volume of colors they have, the number of colors, and have trouble keeping their values tight. So in limiting the number of colors, you actually have a much easier process, in my mind, of keeping your values close together. And especially in this case, since most of these colors are being mixed with predominantly black to get the color that you want. The only color that you have here, besides black, the other two colors are an earth yellow, which is dim to begin with. It's not a vibrant color like cad yellow, and a cad red light, which is the most vibrant color on the palette. And I see how bright that yellow is in this context, surrounded by the other colors. I'm mixing on the palette, on the easel directly, mixing these paints directly on the easel to pull them together. Much of this, what I have been painting so far, has been very, very lightly feathered so that I don't mix the paints. So as I'm applying the paint, and you'll see me doing that again, as I'm applying the paint, I'm putting it on very, very lightly with a featherweight touch so that I don't mix the colors that I'm applying on the paint. If I want red to lay over or the purple to lay over, I can apply it very lightly so that it doesn't mix. In the case of applying the yellow, I specifically wanted it to mix on the easel, so that I could bring the value down to where I wanted it to get to. And now I'm going to go back in and work some of these red and the yellow together to, again, get that feeling of the natural progression between the red and the yellow in this particular vase. And here I'm barely touching the canvas. In this case, it's actually a board. I'm painting on I believe this is an aluminum board, also from Artifacts, which is a company that's related to natural pigments, an aluminum composite material board.
So Ollie, asked the question of whether or not where the focal point is in the painting. Ultimately, the focal point is, the main actor of this
I'm
painting
trying to get this,
is
working
this
to get this yellow, maintain its value
vase, the big
structure,
vase,
get this
and
yellow
with the other actors as supporting
highlight.
it in the process. So as far as sharpening, edging, edges are as has been said, the soul of a painting. So as you progress, some of the edges in this will get sharpened, and some will get softened, and some will get lost to make it, hopefully, to help the eye of the viewer flow through the painting better. Tanya asked the question if could Telly talk about the school for a bit. We started Epiphany Fine Arts as we were planning on building a physical in-person school, and then we're kind of interrupted by this COVID thing. So we went online and decided to do everything online instead. So we're gathering a growing number of artists of all different mediums to basically work by building a long series of videos, an ever-growing body of videos that describe the aspect of the painting process in depth. And one of the problems when you're reading a book that somebody's written about painting is you can't ask a question. If they say something in 3 sentences, you either get it or you don't. See what the beauty of that highlight does? And that at this point, it really makes it pop and look round.
Of course, the yellow being a warmer color.
So we decided to build a school environment where people can watch videos at their own pace. We as teachers can attempt to answer the question multiple different ways, because when I say X, Y, and Z is how you should do this for X reason, if you're not in the proper place to understand that at that point, you can miss that and really just not get it. But with the beauty of having multiple videos covering some of these subjects in many different ways, is it gives the student the ability to see the same thing in a way that suddenly it might the light goes on overhead and it clicks, and then you understand what's being said.
So as you can see,
So
the bottle is
very
starting to
very
develop
excited
from
about
the
this,
beginning.
and
Some of it,
we're really
if you
taking
some
off
shadows on
and
the backside of the bottle,
getting
I'm
this
beginning
process
to be able
going.
to actually see it as a three-dimensional object. And interestingly enough, a multicolored three-dimensional object. I just jumped here to save time and move on to a different subject. I'd added the oranges and the reflections into the bottle and the bottom, with the initial bottom piece. I had to tweak this a little bit as we go on. I believe I go back and tweak the bottle a number of times to adjust its shape a little bit and clean up a few things. But I wanted to start working on and go over with you the blue vase. Now this blue color that's out here is that I'm putting on here is black, ivory black and white, nothing else. As you probably have experienced, if you use ivory black, has a lot of blue in it, so that if you just mix it with white, it gives a bluish gray, very steel bluish gray. If you paint somebody's hair with this, it tends to look, if you're trying to paint a gray-haired person, you'll end up with a bottle blue-gray hair color that is very artificial looking. To actually turn this into a real gray, I would add yellow ochre, which will cancel out the blue and turn it into more of a real gray. But I just jumped here. I wanted to show you the vase as it's getting a little bit more developed. It's actually a little long at this point. I cut it a little bit later. I realized it had grown a little bit, because this bottle is actually supposed to be behind and a little in back of the big vase. But a couple of things that I'm doing to try and make the blue look more blue in this case. If you to make this look more blue, you want to surround it, because it's really a very dull gray color. You want to surround it with warm colors. I have the green bottle next to it, green yellow bottle next to it. Behind it we have a greenish background, and in a few minutes I'm going to be putting those red grapes in. The red grapes were chosen in part because of the fact that they're warmer, a warmer color, and they'll help bring out the blue quality in the gray. As a matter of fact, if you want to paint blue eyes, I often use just black and white to create this kind of gray color, because if you use real blue, ultramarine blue or something like that in there, you tend to get eyes that look like they're neon lasers shooting at you. I use a very muted, often just this gray, but surrounded by all the warm flesh color, it makes it look very, very blue. We're just putting in some shadow here, and in a few minutes, in a minute, we'll have a cut and fade into where I adjusted the bottle, because I want to get into the and pushed it back behind the larger bottle, because I want to get the grapes in here before we finish, to give you a sense of what that might do to the how that affects the color of the blue. And any second I'll be starting that, and we'll speed up to get that going, because grapes are pretty straightforward in painting. To start with a general mass, and with in this case being multicolored grapes, I'll try and get some of the rough colors in there, getting a little of the shadow in behind it, and we'll block these
Thank you,
grapes
Jim.
in. The final painting, I did expand on them put in more grapes than will be in here by the time we stop. And of course I put in the white flowers and the rest of the cleaned up the rest of the painting. And we've got
What do you notice about that, Tanya?
I'm just basically giving a
One of the
couple of
things that's
edges
really important is
without any
35
real mass or shape or
uh,
worrying about the grapes, just getting some basic
there's the
colors
left,
in there.
there's direct painting of there's left and right that you can put the paint on the canvas, but there's also the depth and pressure that you put the paint on, and there's remarkable what you can do by how delicately you can put the paint on the brush on the canvas.
Again, I wanted to have that orangey color next to this
Just
blue
back
bottle to enhance the blue bottle.
which I've sharpened.
I'm going to start putting the highlights on, and again, like I mentioned earlier,
Point.
it's the highlight points that bring out the three-dimensionality. It's one of the key components in making something look three-dimensional, as long as you put the highlight in the right place. So I'm going to start by
Well, I hope that means I'm using
putting
it
a
the
few
correct
highlights
way.
into this mass, and that will help create the illusion of individual grapes. As I place them in here, I'm not worrying at this point about how thick or gobby it is, because I'm going to adjust that. And I eventually, by the way, do put a
Yes,
lighter,
I
it's
feel
a
it when
surface
people use
that
the
these
brush
things
all the
are
way up with the
sitting
ferrule, and I always smack my students' hands about that. They can every one of them tell you. You're at that point you're drawing. You're not painting. There's a reason that the brush is as long as it is. It gives you better control. It also gets you further away from the painting, so you can see what it looks like at a distance. Paintings were designed to be looked at at a distance, not up close, like drawings were. And which is why many paintings you stand 20 feet away from them, they scream at you how beautiful they are, and you walk up to them and they fall apart. The entire image collapses, and all you see is streaks and colors. You have to get away from the painting to be able to see that as you're painting it.
bring the value, make it vary the intensity of that. I believe I actually put a little bit of a brighter orange on that top grape again, because I wanted to make it a little bit more orange.
I mean, what I'm doing when I'm manipulating the paint to adjust these highlights, the brush is barely touching the canvas,
Little highlights.
the board.
I've seen people put highlights on grapes where they use a chopstick or a skewer, little shish kebab skewer, and it works. A lot of times I've seen exactly the same
Excellent.
size dot on all of the grapes. I like to vary it a little bit. Some of them, in real life, they're not usually all exactly the same brightness. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you found this to be a useful demonstration. If you did, please check us out at epiphanyfineart.com, where we have a large library of artists' instructional materials that you can view at your own time and at your own pace. Thank you again.
Beautiful job there. And great to see just that going right through that whole painting. By the way, was that painted in 3 hours, or was that?
2 sessions that added up to about 3 hours. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. So yeah, amazing work. Really, thank you for that. And you talked a little bit about your school and your plans are you're doing more online, but are you going to be doing some like online mentoring?
Yes, actually, that varies on the teacher, depending on the teacher who's in the class, who's teaching the particular class. I personally love working one-on-one with students, and have it is an option to have critiques of the students' work, direct critiques that can be scheduled, We also have live videos, live demonstrations that people can see and discuss, just like we're doing now, and have interaction while the painting's happening. And as well as the canned videos that the growing library of canned videos and the growing library of artists that we're recruiting to work with us.
Great.
So,
Well, thanks very much, Matt. And thank you for sharing that video with us and taking the time out from your busy move right now.
I just moved to a new house and a new studio simultaneously.
So
But
great.
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me and inviting me to be here with you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure we're going to be doing more of this in the future.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye now.